Well, hello, human biology students. This is the video recording intended for Monday's lecture. Just thinking about picking up where we left off with the small intestine. A couple of things that I wanted to mention. One of the things you're probably wondering, I showed you the pill cam video last Friday, and you know that's how we get some visual idea of what's going on. But well before that, researchers had some unique opportunities in history that presented themselves, and one of them was a gentleman named Alexis Martin, and he was a fur trapper, and he was on Mackinac, or I guess I should say Mackinac Island, in northern Michigan, in 1822, about June of 1822. He was standing outside the company store, and somebody was standing next to him that had a loaded double-barrel shotgun. He was duck hunting in June. You know, this is not something we do these days, but in 1822 they did. And the gun went off accidentally, both barrels, and it hit Alexis right here. It basically hit his chest at the spot between the thoracic and abdominal cavity. At an angle, fortunately for him, it blew away flesh. There were ribs that were sticking out. Both the thoracic and abdominal cavities were penetrated, and onlookers, you know, and this is in the days of black powder, and so his clothing was on fire, and they had to put out the fire and then try to patch up. I mean, just the wound. Everybody was sure he was a dead man, and you know, really, this happened right over the heart too. So, but it wasn't a direct on shot. It glanced across him, and he actually survived. The problem was, for the next 17 days, everything that went in through his mouth came out through that hole because it blew the stomach open, as well as some of his lungs away. And so, you know, the only way they could keep him alive is by putting partially digested food on a stick, basically, and shoving it down that hole into the stomach and on into the small intestine. They were able to do that. Eventually, the stomach actually healed to the wall of the body. So the stomach normally would be this structure like this, and the wall of the body here with a space between. Well, the two healed right together so that this hole right here actually went directly into the stomach. It was a good thing because then the stomach juices didn't just spill out into the abdominal cavity and contaminate him. So that hole remained, and he had to plug it so that what he then ate through his mouth didn't come just leaking out through that hole. And it provided an opportunity for researchers. There was a military doctor by the name of Beaumont that took full advantage of this, and would put various things down into the stomach to see what happened to them. And this was how one of the ways we discovered that the stomach, in fact, digested protein. It didn't do much to fat, it didn't do much to carbohydrates, but it did digest proteins. What a unique opportunity that was. This guy, even though he was only 28 when he was shot, he actually lived to be 86 years old. And this is a picture of him later in life with his wife. She does not look like a happy woman. I don't know. I guess he liked the bottle too much, and you know, he looks like maybe he's a few sheets to the wind there, which is maybe why she's not real happy. But anyway, he did, you know, provide information as to how the digestive tract works. That's one of the ways that it happened. You've probably heard of people doing things to try to desperately trying to deal with overweight, being overweight, and just, you know, how do they do? They're willing to do anything to not be so overweight. And one of the things, let me just move this up out of the way so I can find the one I want. One of the things that people will do is gastric bypass surgery. And I'm desperately looking for it here, and I'm not finding it here, so I will go back to where I know it is and open it. So these are some examples of the surgeries that people will undergo to lose weight. In this particular one, a band is placed around the stomach, and it can be tightened or loosened to just make a little pouch so the person feels full rather than trying to fill this whole thing. In this lower one here, a significant portion of the stomach and small intestine, duodenum, are actually bypassed. And so here, there's a smaller stomach created, and it goes directly like that. I got to move me again here a little bit. Another couple of variations here, the stomach is physically removed. A significant portion of it is physically removed. And here it is another way that its size is significantly reduced so that the person feels full. And then these are some other, very traumatic ways that people will reduce the size of the stomach so that they eat less. I have a friend that actually did this twice. I think he did one of these, like this or this, where he reduced the size of the stomach, but he continued to eat, and that stomach regained its former size. So he did it again. They actually approved him for a second surgery, and the second time around actually was fairly effective for him, and he was controlling his weight very well and had done so for a number of years. But that's the measures that some people will go to control their weight. Okay, so then we went to the small intestine. We talked about the parts of it and the villi, microvilli. Basically, there's two things that go on in the small intestine. There is digesting and absorbing. So duodenum is the digesting, the jejunum and the ileum is the absorbing part. If you have a friend or loved one in the hospital and they, for whatever reason, maybe they're unconscious or whatever, they have to be fed artificially, they will put in what's called a J-tube. Just the slang is a J-tube. And it's going into the jejunum because they're putting nutrients into the system that are ready to be absorbed directly. They don't need to be digested anymore. And so they're shooting for the jejunum, and that's the reason for the name, a J-tube. Well, like with the stomach and gastrin, all that goes on in the stomach and the small intestine has to be controlled, and is typically done with hormones. And so if we look back at where we're at in the larger scheme of things, we've gone through the stomach now, we're going into the small intestine. Now, the stomach this is not small intestine, this is large intestine, so the stomach is actually connecting to the small intestine behind the large intestine in this image, so that you're not confused by this. But so how is this then hormonally controlled in your body? Well, right here, this is the pyloric sphincter. This is the start of the small intestine. There are receptors there. Some of the first ones sense the presence of protein that's come through the stomach, and fat. Again, there's other things involved, but those are kind of the two main things. And when the small intestine senses fat and protein, it produces cholecystokinin, which you don't have to remember that word or say that name. Just remember CCK, cholecystokinin. And it turns the stomach off, and it causes release of bile from the gallbladder. And just so you have an idea for the association of those other organs, where they're at, actually, that's not the one I wanted. Here. Okay, so here's the stomach, and this will be the small intestine. This will be the duodenum here. So here's the liver, okay, and here's the gallbladder. So the liver actually produces bile, but gallbladder concentrates it and stores it. And then here is the pancreas. So pancreas, gallbladder, liver. Those are the other organs that are really critical in our control of the digestive tract. Okay, so cholecystokinin turns the stomach off. We didn't always think that. This is a copy of your textbook from, I think it was a second edition. So back in the 90s. Same author, but in this textbook it says in one part, let me tip this down a little. It says experimental evidence has shown that the duodenal wall, that's the small intestinal wall, produces hormones, the most important of which are secretin and cholecystokinin, CCK. And that goes on to say, still another hormone has only recently been discovered, GIP, gastric inhibitory peptide. And it says apparently works in opposition to gastrin because it inhibits gastric acid secretions. See, it was named gastric inhibitory peptide because we thought it turned the stomach off. Well, for the research has indicated that no, it doesn't do that. It's still got the name GIP. They've put on some other convoluted other name for it, but no, cholecystokinin turns the stomach off. It's just an example of how our understanding of the human body has continued to change. So cholecystokinin, it turns the stomach off, and it causes the gallbladder to kick bile, that greenish stuff that helps to digest fat by making it break apart in water. Okay. The next one is a secretin. So that stuff that's coming out of the stomach is very acidic. And so that acid condition triggers the release of another hormone, secretin. And this one goes to the pancreas and tells the pancreas to secrete sodium bicarbonate. Now you should remember that word bicarbonate. It was the main acid buffering molecule that we talked about. This particular one has a sodium on it, but the pancreas produces this to reduce the acidity of what's coming out of the stomach. And so that up arrow means it increases pH. It increases the pH of the chyme that's coming out of the stomach, makes it more basic, more neutral actually. And then it also kicks in some digestive enzymes from the pancreas. Now we'll deal with a few of those in lab on Tuesday. Okay, so that's hormone number 2. Hormone number 3 is GIP that I alluded to before. This one is triggered by the fat and glucose that are in the chyme that has come out of the stomach and entered the small intestine. And this one actually triggers insulin release. Now, I'm guessing that insulin is a term that you're familiar with, but you may not know a great deal about it. You know that it has something to do with diabetes and sugar and all that. Yep, you're right, it does. Insulin is produced by the pancreas, by a particular part of the pancreas called islet of Langerhans cells, or simply beta cells. You don't have to remember that, but the pancreas is incredibly diverse. I asked you before as a class if you knew people that had pancreatic cancer, and I think 1 or 2 of you did, and somebody had known somebody that beat it, and that's awesome. That's hard to do because it is such a diverse organ. One of the things that the pancreas does is produce insulin. Insulin's job is to go to the cells in your body and to cause there we go. This is a picture of the cell membrane from chapter 3 in your textbook. Okay, and here we have the lipid bilayer. Here's the cell membrane. Here's inside the cell. Here's outside the cell. Okay, and these orange things are protein carrier molecules. Okay, they're there to escort, if you will, molecules into the cell, whatever your cell might want to be inside of the cell. Now, this shows one here, and this is a good picture, and another here, and another here, because many of them just hang out in the cell cytoplasm until they're needed. But they have to be signaled, and when they're signaled to do something, they'll be inserted into the cell membrane, and then they'll be able to escort something in. They don't necessarily hang out all their lives in the membrane. They have to be put in the membrane. So insulin comes along. So if you could picture the bloodstream right next to this membrane here, and it gets sensed by these molecules here on the cell protein or the cell membrane outside of it. And what they do then is they trigger that membrane to have more of these insulin, of these glucose carrying molecules get into that membrane. That's all insulin does. Without insulin, you can have all the sugar in the world out here and no sugar in the world in here, and the sugar out here will never get into there, or has a hard time getting into there, because there's no way for it to get across the membrane. It's too big of a molecule. It won't fit through an aquaporin or a gap junction. You need this facilitated diffusion that these molecules provide. And so that's what insulin does. And it's absolutely essential. Here in just a second, we'll talk for just a moment about, actually I don't know, we'll see, about diabetes. I'm going to insert a special piece on diabetes into the lecture notes here. We'll see how far we get. Okay, so yeah, so that's what insulin does, and GIP is intimately involved with getting insulin released when you need it. And if you think about it, you're going to need it when it's available. Obviously, you're going to need it all the time, but it's going to be available in the digestive, or as a result of the digestive process. One last hormone that we'll talk about is motilin. I like to put this one in for a number of reasons. It's important. We don't know the trigger for this yet. Not sure what triggers motilin. It's released in the small intestine, and it speeds up peristalsis. So there are times when your body needs to get things through the system faster. And so it kicks motilin in there. But of course, sometimes it can be too fast and you get diarrhea. So what do? You got to take a medication for it. So instead of motilin, maybe you'll take Imodium. And Imodium would be for diarrhea, really, anti-diarrheal. Okay? So it's going to work in opposition to motilin, which makes your small intestine, it speeds up peristalsis. Okay, then just to reiterate, here's the stomach, here's the small intestine, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas are associated. They're important. They're getting hormones or being affected by hormones, and dumping various digestive enzymes or insulin or bile into the system. Okay, and so I wanted to just spend a minute or so here and talk about diabetes. And so what specifically I'm going to do is inject these notes into your notes. Normally I would write these on the board, but I'm not going to do that today. Let's see how far I get through them. So I'm guessing there's probably somebody in the class that might suffer with diabetes. Certainly there's a number of you in class that know somebody that's had diabetes. And there's really two major kinds of diabetes, with a third kind of important related one. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 diabetes is called juvenile onset diabetes, and it tends to happen to people that are under the age of 40. We call it an autoimmune disease. You're going to see that word autoimmune. We've talked about it a little bit already. You're going to see it in this class a number of times. Autoimmune is a disease that results from your body attacking itself. And oftentimes it's a case of misidentification. And current research suggests that that's exactly what's going on with type 1 diabetes. It looks like the body has mistaken a virus that it has fought off successfully in the past, but it's mistaken some cells in your pancreas for that virus and attacking those cells. They've even isolated the virus to have a pretty good idea which virus it is. And, honestly, there's some research that's looking into the possibility that if you can catch the onset of type 1 early enough, you could suppress that immune response before the pancreas was completely killed off. That's hard to do. So anyway, it's an autoimmune disease, and it's where insulin is produced. And really, in this case, there's no insulin produced. None to very little, really no insulin produced. And the body can then shift to producing ATP other ways, because remember, the whole idea is for insulin to result in more glucose getting into the cell that the cell can then use to make ATP in the cytoplasm and on the mitochondria. Okay, without glucose, your body can still use amino acids and fats to produce ATP, and it will do that. And we'll talk about what results from that probably next Wednesday. And so the person has a distinct shortage of glucose in the system, still alive, still producing ATP other ways, but that's going to have ramifications. Type 2 diabetes is more common. It's the plague of our time in some respects, really. This is called adult onset. And with adult onset diabetes, insulin receptors in cells decline. So the cell membrane that we looked at before won't have nearly the same number of insulin receptors. These right here, these things that sense insulin in the bloodstream and cause there to be more protein carrier molecules in the membrane as a result of it. So it's going to interfere with that. It'll reduce the number with type 2 diabetic has a reduced number of insulin receptors, and so additionally, they're often overweight, and adipose tissue, which is a fancy name for fat tissue, itself releases a substance which impairs the insulin receptors that are there. So not only are there fewer insulin receptors, the ones that are there are interfered with, if you will, by adipose, by a chemical that adipose tissue creates. Now, if you know somebody that's a type 2 diabetic, they're encouraged to exercise. And one of the reasons for this is because exercise, the act of moving muscles, in essence, squeezes glucose into cells, or transporters into the membrane. It results in more glucose getting into the cells, and is a good treatment, a good way to deal with the effects of diabetes. That's why exercise is encouraged. Of course, the other reason is to reduce weight and hopefully adipose tissue, which if there's less of it, there'll be less of the chemicals that impair insulin receptors, and so it's generally a good thing. I'm going to skip to A1C here for just a second. We'll get to gestational diabetes. I actually may pick that up in lecture on Wednesday. So let's talk about A1C for a second. You may well have seen commercials that deal with A1C. Like, for instance, here's a Jardiance commercial. I think I can show this without getting blocked. I'm not sure.
I have type 2 diabetes, but I manage it well. It's a little pill with a big story to tell. I take once daily Jardiance at each day start. As time went on, it was easy to see. I'm lowering my A1C.
Well, hopefully I don't get blocked for showing that. But A1C, yeah, that's a big deal. So A1C is a chemical that your body produces when blood glucose is too high. Now, you got to remember, if your body is not producing enough insulin, the insulin is there to get glucose, which is outside the cell, inside the cell by making more of these transporters that would carry it in there. Okay, without them, the glucose is going to stay out here in your blood supply, if you will, and it's not going to get into your cells. If it's in your blood supply for a long time, if you have elevated glucose levels, they're going to combine with hemoglobin. That's an element of red blood cells that carries oxygen. So the combination of hemoglobin and glucose is A1C. And A1C is a good marker that tells a doctor how well you've been controlling your blood sugar. High A1C levels, you're doing a bad job. Low A1C levels, you're doing a good job. And so that's an important molecule to keep an eye on. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. I want to be in class to talk about gestational diabetes for just a second. What I want you to do is I want you to find out how much you weighed at birth. What was your birth weight? If you can find that out for me, we'll do a little poll at the start of class on Wednesday, and then I'm going to relate it to gestational diabetes. I'm going to then just talk a little bit about ketosis and ketoacidosis, which relate to how your body produces ATP when it's not depending on glucose, and so we'll go from there. So again, find out what your birth weight was, and we'll see you in class on, well, I'll see you on Tuesday, but we'll pick this up on Wednesday. All right, thank you.